These two iconic managers have brought a lot of joy to FC Barcelona in terms of results, goals, points, victories, and trophies. Very different approaches in both their Barcelona teams that they managed, however, similar and the same results. As always, do subscribe to the channel. I'm posting regular Barcelona content at least once a week because I'm trying to get back to where I was with my previous channel of over 11,000 subscribers. As always, do subscribe. Let's start the video. The build-up is probably one of the biggest differences that you will ever see between a Flick and Pep Guardiola team, where Barcelona under Pep had this more methodical type of build-up and gradually break through, probably because teams were sitting in a much lower block than what teams do today. But also the way that the left back was used almost as a third center back, where the other one, particularly Alves, would go up and support the winger there and also provide the width. Whereas with Hansi Flick, you rarely see people do that for Flick's team. Koundé does that at times, but very rarely does that. So that's one of the biggest differences that you will see. Pep's Barcelona was much more simulated, especially within the build-up, where players had specific tasks in order to make this system tick. It's much more flexible now, but players like Eric Abidal had a specific role in the build-up where he would do this over and over. Koundé also does this for Flick, but it's not a tactic. The use of Eric Abidal for Pep Guardiola was super important, and I don't think people actually understand how important he was, where he would stay very close to what's going on in the build-up phase in order to receive the ball. That was actually to draw the winger out in order to free up Andres Iniesta in these positions. That would then just have a ripple effect, and that's how Messi's false nine combined everything, and that's how Barcelona would simply just find their way in behind. So this player becoming a third center back was actually also not only to have a numerical advantage, because that's what people think it's about, but it's also to draw out this winger, and Iniesta had a lot of success in this area right here. The usage of the fullbacks was very different. Look at how Abidal is almost like an inverted position in order to withdraw the attention from Andres Iniesta in this half space, and Iniesta would get a lot of ball there. This attack here actually broke out because of that very reason. However, another player got the ball in this instance right over here. You can see that the pathway to Iniesta is always open, and Real Madrid had a hard time coping with this because Andres kept on finding the ball. However, Hansi Flick doesn't want his fullbacks nowhere near the midfield, of course in instances that he cannot control, but for the most part he wants them to be on the touchline due to the fact that his wingers, especially Rafinha, enjoys a much more central role. And we even saw that Hansi Flick also has Lamine Yamal in these more central positions, so that if the opposition's left back or fullback is really good at locking him down, Lamine will actually move knowing that this fullback cannot move with him. So that has really made it hard for teams to actually lock Barcelona's wingers down. So now if this happens, Flick wants his fullbacks in these higher positions. That's why he doesn't want them to be near the midfield. So Flick are using his fullbacks, Balde and Koundé in this instance, in a very traditional type of manner, which actually makes me think that this is much more organized in terms of the shape. However, look at Yamal and Rashford. They are not hugging the touchline at all. Not at all. And there's a reason why he wants them to start in these central positions, right? But look at this instance where Yamal is receiving the ball in the half space, and look at Koundé. All of that space that is left now is all for the fullback. So very different usage. Now, of course, there's a reason why Pep Guardiola wanted his wingers to stay wide. The first one, of course, being the positioning of Lionel Messi. Messi kept on dropping into these spaces in order to receive the ball and then make the attack tick, which was incredibly effective for Barcelona. So you can't be having these wingers in these areas if you have a guy doing what Messi does. So it was important for the opposition to be stretched in order to allow Messi to drop into these situations and then find the likes of Iniesta and Xavi higher up the pitch. So you needed to have these wingers extremely wide in order to allow Messi these spaces, because in essence nobody could really follow Messi when he would do this, right? So that was a very key difference, and Messi just kept on tearing apart these defenses. Man, it was something else to watch. But there's another reason why, which is another difference between the two managers, where Hansi Flick uses a double pivot and Pep Guardiola used a single pivot. This is super, super important. Now, many times in the past, you would see Busquets starting off as the sole pivot, where if needed, you would see Xavi coming into these areas in order to become like the second pivot. More often than not, you would then see people moving into these areas in order to mark Xavi, but then that opened the gateway for Lionel Messi, which is what I showed you in the previous frame, right? So your wingers had to stay wide. They couldn't be in these areas because then it would just overcrowd the space, and Messi would then turn around, and then this attack ended up being lethal, where these wingers would just make runs in behind. And in the same sense, Pep Guardiola then with this also pins back the opposition's fullbacks, meaning that Barcelona had a lot of control within the midfield. So in this frame, we see that Xavi is running back. Rather than starting as a pivot, he's running into that position. So I think Pep Guardiola was actually motivating the opposition to press, right? Look at how the player followed Xavi, and now Messi is running into that space. So now Messi also has a player that's coming out of position in order to defend him. Flick uses his wingers differently because he already has an established double pivot that he wants to help in the build-up to secure the build-up. So that means now Barcelona only has one player up high in the half spaces. But this is also to aid, first of all, Lamine Yamal, because more often than not, you would see people being on him and just double team or even triple team, even quadruple team him sometimes. So Flick wanted really Lamine to receive the ball in this space right here, and recently I've noticed, especially since the last game against Inter Milan, he would receive the ball here. This opens up the space behind the fullback, and then he would simply just sprint into the area here and then cut inside again. This has elevated Lamine Yamal in so many ways, because if he would just wait for the ball, receive it here, then that would be so easy for the opposition to defend, meaning he can only play the ball back into the field because of the touchline that's there. But now because he's here, he can really play both ways. And don't forget, Koundé can also slot into this area right here. Lamine Yamal being tripled and quadruple teamed is something that Barcelona fans are going to watch for years and years and years to come. So he cannot be hugging a touchline. So you would now see he receives the ball in the half space where DeMarco actually follows him. This has been a very common theme. So that ensures that Lamine is not marked down. He turns it inside out and then he goes back to the touchline. But look now, there's a difference. Look at the amount of space there is right now, which would have not been there if he was solely on the touchline. This makes it easier now for Lamine then to come back inside, because they would follow him to the touchline, opening up the middle, and now he can go back in. So this is really to aid Lamine Yamal. The other reason is, which bringing me to the ultimate difference between Pep's Barca and Flick's Barca, is the fact that he wants to be vertical. So which means he's going to want to, the second pass will already be at a forward's feet, because Flick doesn't want to go around the touchline and then play around there. Meaning that if Rafinha or Yamal receives the ball here, he will more than likely be followed. That creates the space in order for the likes of Lewandowski, Ferran Torres, even Koundé to run in. Because how many times did we see, especially Marcus Rashford, where he was followed, or a player in the midfield was followed, and he would simply just run through and scroll from this area right here. And the biggest difference between Pep's Barca and Flick's Barca is the verticality, where Pep's Barcelona would have been a lot more like methodical in the build-up, a lot more patient, but Flick doesn't want to have patience. He wants to have verticality. That's why he wanted his inverted wingers, meaning they can now easily score from this area as well. How many times have we seen Rafinha from central areas come through and then score, rather from coming from the wide areas and then score? So that's the differences. Here we see Rafinha doing something very similar to what Lamine Yamal is doing, dropping off, draw the player out of position, and then beat him for speed with the space in behind. Look at Rafinha again receiving the ball, and a bunch, actually two of Inter Milan's players followed Rafinha into this area right over here. However, what do you think is the difference between Pep's Barcelona and Hansi Flick's Barcelona, although both teams have the same outcome? Goals, 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 and more goals. Don't miss more Barcelona tactical content. I will see you in the next video. Subscribe, leave a like, comment. I'll see you in the next one.